Ladies and gentlemen, if you're tired of overgiving, over-explaining, and overthinking, stop. The most powerful shift you will ever make is this: match energy or withdraw yours completely. Stop negotiating your worth in spaces that can't even hold a conversation about effort. Because when you stop showing up for people who don't show up for you, something incredible happens. They either rise to meet you or they disappear. And both are answers. Stay with me, because in the next few seconds, I'm going to show you how silence, standards, and self-respect will do what begging never could. When you choose silence, you're not retreating, you're stepping into your power. You're recognizing that energy is sacred and not everyone deserves yours. There comes a moment when words become redundant and your absence becomes the loudest thing in the room. Silence isn't passive, it's a statement. A declaration that your time, your space, your peace aren't up for negotiation. It's the emotional equivalent of closing the door without slamming it. When someone no longer aligns with your values, you don't scream it, you simply walk away. And in that quiet departure, you say everything you ever needed to say. The strongest boundaries are often unspoken. The most powerful moves are often the calmest. Choosing not to react is not weakness, it's mastery. It's the realization that not everything or everyone deserves a reply. There's a difference between silence that comes from suppression and silence that comes from strength. The former comes from fear, the latter from self-worth. When your peace becomes your priority, noise no longer seduces you. You stop defending yourself, explaining yourself, proving yourself. You begin to understand that some connections don't need closure, they need distance, and sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is nothing. No reply, no chase, no commenter, just grace in the form of stillness. People often confuse silence with giving up, but it's actually the opposite. It's choosing not to be pulled into energy that drains you. You don't need to match chaotic behavior with chaos of your own. You just need to stop showing up where you're not seen clearly. The moment you understand that your response is a gift, not a given, you reclaim control. You become selective, intentional, powerful. When you stop feeding situations that no longer nourish you, something interesting happens. Your self-respect grows. It stops being about who was right or wrong. It becomes about who values their peace enough to protect it. And when you make that choice, you stop looking back. Silence teaches you the art of restraint. It's easy to react, to confront, to demand attention. But when you pause, when you choose calm over chaos, you access a deeper kind of strength. That strength doesn't shout, it doesn't plead, it doesn't chase. It simply walks in a different direction, one paved with intention and clarity. And in that direction, you begin to meet yourself again. Not the version molded by someone else's inconsistency, but the version rooted in her own sense of worth. You realize that silence isn't absence, it's presence, but redirected. You're no longer giving yourself away, you're coming home to yourself. There is a sacredness in not responding, in holding space for your own healing instead of trying to manage someone else's behavior. You begin to see how much energy you once spent explaining what should have been understood, and you realize you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong source. In the silence, you create room for perspective. You allow clarity to replace confusion. You no longer rely on someone else's validation to confirm your value. That's the moment you start growing from the inside out. And what God owes from that kind of silence is unshakable. It's mature, it's peaceful, it's you becoming whole. When you detach with dignity, you send a message that words never could. That you are not desperate for attention, you are devoted to alignment. That your standards are not conditional, they are consistent. You begin to embody calmness as a boundary, and what used to trigger you no longer touches you. You don't need to make an announcement. Your actions do the talking. You don't need to prove your worthiness. You simply stop engaging where it's overlooked. And in that quiet withdrawal, you rise. You separate yourself from the noise. You become untouchable, not because you're guarded, but because you're grounded. The world teaches us to fight for things, but sometimes the win is in the walk away. You learn that grace is not weakness. and restraint is not surrender. You begin to feel proud, not because you got even, but because you got free. You stop explaining your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop offering energy to dynamics that never offered safety. And in doing so, you build something priceless, your emotional sanctuary, a place where you no longer need to argue to be heard or beg to be seen, a place where you choose yourself every time. That's the kind of silence that echoes with power. Eventually, the noise quiets and the craving for chaos fades. You begin to enjoy your own company again. Your mornings feel lighter, your mind clearer. You stop rehearsing conversations that never needed to happen. And you realize this is what freedom feels like. Not proving, not chasing, not pleading, just existing with ease. You fill your life with things that pour back into you. Your friendships deepen. Your creativity returns. You laugh louder. You sleep better. Because when you stopped talking, you started listening to your soul, your body, your intuition, and it had so much to say once the noise was gone. You start to see how many things you once accepted just to avoid being alone, and now being alone feels like a gift. Silence becomes your sanctuary, not your punishment. You realize that peace isn't found in getting someone to change, it's found in choosing to stop waiting. You no longer need the closure you thought you did. You gave it to yourself, not through a dramatic final word, but through a quiet, consistent boundary. You're not trying to be heartless, you're trying to be whole. And wholeness isn't loud, it's subtle, slow, steady. It doesn't look like revenge, it looks like healing. What once felt like loss now feels like liberation. You've proven to yourself that you can walk away without falling apart, that your identity isn't tied to someone else's treatment of you, that your silence doesn't make you invisible, it makes you powerful. You didn't disappear, you simply redirected your focus. You're not cold, you're clear. And that clarity creates space for better things, people who value your presence, situations that honor your voice, environments that match your energy, all because you dared to be quiet when every part of you was tempted to shout. That's not savage, that's self-respect. And it changes everything. Confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It walks into a room and changes the atmosphere without saying a word. It's not found in what you wear, how you speak, or even how you look. It's in how you carry your presence. It's in the way you hold eye contact, in the way you don't chase what's not chasing you. Confidence knows that connection can't be forced, and that silence can often say more than explanation ever could. It's not loud or aggressive, it's composed. It doesn't beg, it doesn't plead, it chooses. And when it senses misalignment, it doesn't fight, it simply steps back. That's not arrogance, that's clarity. The truth is, when you stop needing attention to feel valuable, you become magnetic. You begin to notice how little validation you actually need once you validate yourself. The energy shifts when your self-worth is no longer tied to someone else's acknowledgement. You start to shine differently, calmly, quietly, steadily. That kind of presence draws in respect, not pity. It stops being about who notices you and becomes about who aligns with you. When your confidence is internal, your peace isn't shaken by external inconsistencies. You stop reaching outward for reassurance. You trust that what's meant for you will recognize you without convincing. That's true power. There's a clear difference between desire and desperation. One says, I choose to share my life, and the other screams, I can't be okay without yours. When you lead with desperation, you lose the ability to evaluate clearly. You begin to accept crumbs because you're too afraid of being without the loaf. But confidence lets you observe rather than chase. It allows space for reality to reveal itself. When you're confident, you don't panic in silence. You get curious. You don't fill the space with assumptions. You fill it with awareness. And you learn that not all silence is rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. Sometimes it's grace. Being grounded in your value means you no longer treat inconsistency as mystery. You treat it as incompatibility. You don't decode mixed signals. You don't play detective. You don't waste time trying to be chosen by someone unsure. Instead, you become the chooser. You become the one who watches actions, not words, who leans into mutuality, not ambiguity. And when things don't align, you move on, not with resentment, but with resolution. Because you're no longer trying to prove anything. You're not seeking approval, you're seeking peace. And peace doesn't require performance, it requires standards. Standards that you no longer apologize for having. You begin to realize that over-explaining is a symptom of insecurity. When you're confident, you stop justifying your feelings, your standards, your boundaries. You stop trying to be understood by everyone. You stop bending yourself into shapes just to be palatable. Instead, you trust your intuition. You stand firm in what you know. Confidence isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. Honest with your needs, your limits, and your truth. You stop fearing rejection because you know rejection isn't always about your worth. It's often about misalignment. And when you see that clearly, you stop begging for connection. You start choosing quality over attachment. A confident woman doesn't ask, "Why am I not enough?" She asks, "Why am I entertaining what doesn't nourish me?" Her strength isn't in holding on, but in letting go of what drains her. She knows that neediness isn't the same as love, it's the absence of self-trust. And so she builds trust with herself, she keeps her promises, she listens to her gut, she honors her energy, and in doing so she becomes whole. She no longer waits for someone else to complete her, she brings the fullness of who she is to the table and expects the same in return. That's not ego, that's emotional maturity. There's a calm that comes from not needing to convince anyone to see your value. You stop negotiating your worth like it's up for discussion. You stop trying to be low maintenance just to be liked. You stop shrinking your needs to fit someone else's comfort zone. Instead, you stand in them. You own your sensitivity. You protect your heart. You prioritize your peace. And you realize it's not about being easy to keep. It's about being impossible to misuse. You don't want to be tolerated, you want to be deeply seen. And the right spaces won't make you beg for that. They'll reflect it back effortlessly. The shift happens when your attention becomes expensive, when you stop giving it freely to things that exhaust you, when you start investing in yourself the way you once invested in the wrong people. That investment low, okays like boundaries. It looks like choosing solitude over shallow company. It looks like pouring your energy into your passions, your health, your inner world. And as you do, you stop obsessing over who's noticing. You realize the more you focus on becoming your best self, the less you're attached to who's watching. You start living for alignment, not applause. And suddenly, everything changes. Confidence is built in solitude. In those moments when no one is texting you, no one is validating you, and you still feel good in your skin. You learn that your value didn't leave when someone else did, that your worth doesn't rise and fall with someone's attention span. You discover what it feels like to hold space for your own joy, to laugh without an audience, to create without needing approval. And when that becomes your baseline, you become dangerous in the best way. Because you're no longer driven by fear of being alone. You're driven by the desire to remain whole. What used to make you anxious now makes you uninterested. You've outgrown the urge to chase things that don't chase back. You no longer interpret distance as a challenge, you interpret it as data. You stop taking inconsistency personally, you start seeing it as incompatibility. Confidence doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself. You don't try to prove your worth to people who don't know what to do with it. You protect it, you preserve it, you walk with it like it's woven into your DNA, because it is. And the more you live like that, the less you settle for anything less. There is a quiet strength in choosing not to explain yourself. Not every feeling needs to be translated into words. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. When you no longer need to be understood to feel secure, you tap into real confidence. You stop wasting your breath trying to fix what someone else refuses to see. You stop writing paragraphs to defend emotions that are already valid. You let silence do the heavy lifting. You trust that your boundaries, even when unspoken, still matter. That the truth doesn't become less true just because you stop saying it. In that space, your dignity breathes. Silence is not retreat, it's refinement. It's the process of filtering out what doesn't deserve space in your energy field. It's the art of releasing what no longer serves you without making it a performance. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop arguing with people who never intended to listen. You stop handing over your emotional power in exchange for temporary relief. The need to constantly explain is often a form of emotional debt, an attempt to earn permission to feel what you feel. But you don't need permission to be at peace. You don't need permission to walk away. Letting silence speak is not cold, it's clarity wrapped in composure. In silence, things reveal themselves. You start to see what was always there, just drowned out by noise. You stop filling awkward spaces with desperate words, and you start observing patterns instead. You become less interested in being right and more committed to being well. When you step back from the need to explain, you create room for truth to settle. It's in that space that clarity is born. You realize that if someone couldn't hear you when you were speaking clearly, your silence won't confuse them. It'll confirm everything. Silence is not about manipulation, it's about elevation. It's a natural response to emotional exhaustion and unmet effort. There's a moment when you realize your voice doesn't belong in every conversation. You don't need to correct every misunderstanding or clarify every emotion. You don't need to plead for grace, for time, for understanding. You begin to recognize that your energy is better spent building yourself than constantly trying to bridge gaps you didn't create. When you choose silence, you're not avoiding confrontation. You're choosing not to waste your soul on circular conversations. You're choosing inner peace over external validation. You're choosing emotional efficiency. The silence is not empty. It's full of boundaries, lessons, and self-respect. It's a language all its own. When you stop explaining, you also stop rehearsing the same pain. You stop living inside a loop of what-ifs and why-nots. You liberate your mind from trying to make sense of the senseless. You realize that not everything is meant to be solved through dialogue. Some things require distance, not discussion. Some healing comes not from understanding why, but from accepting that you won't. Your silence becomes a choice, not a punishment. A way to shift from overthinking to simply being. You learn to sit with discomfort without rushing to resolve it. And in that stillness, you find a deeper kind of strength. Not everyone deserves access to your explanations. Your emotions are not a courtroom trial. You don't owe defense arguments to those who never had the intent to honor your truth. When you silence your impulse to explain, you start protecting your peace with a fierce kind of grace. You begin to save your words for those who genuinely listen, not just those who wait for their turn to speak. And in that discernment, you regain control of your narrative. You stop letting other people's confusion define your clarity. You let your absence teach the lessons your words never could. That's not silence. It's strategy. There is nothing more liberating than detaching from the need to be understood. The more you let go of needing people to get it, the more energy you reclaim. You realize that misunderstanding is sometimes a form of resistance, not ignorance. Some people refuse to understand you because doing so would mean admitting their role in your discomfort. So you let it be. You stop pouring explanations into ears that aren't open. You stop demanding empathy from places where it has no roots. You stop needing to be the emotional translator in your own story. Silence becomes your protest, your boundary, and your healing. Eventually, you stop feeling guilty for choosing silence. You understand it's not the same as avoidance, it's alignment. You're not running away from your truth, you're stepping away from dysfunction. You realize that repeating yourself is not clarity, it's a sign you're being ignored. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you've made peace with your perspective. You start to see silence not as emptiness, but as expansion, a space where you can breathe, reset, and realign. You stop shouting in rooms that drain your spirit, and you start whispering in spaces that echo with understanding. That's not weakness, that's evolution. In time, your silence becomes self-care. It becomes the boundary that separates who you were from who you're becoming. You stop talking about change and start embodying it. You realize you don't have to announce your healing for it to be real. You don't have to narrate every chapter for it to be valid. You can simply live it, grow in it, exist in it. The less you explain, the more you expand. You begin to recognize your voice is most powerful when it's used intentionally, not reactively. And when you speak again, you'll do so from a place of strength, not survival. Silence doesn't mean you've lost your voice. It means you're learning when and where to use it. It means you're no longer wasting your breath proving what should be self-evident. It means you've realized your peace is worth more than temporary connection. So you step back, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You choose quiet because it aligns with your growth, not because you're afraid to speak. You become deliberate, you become selective, and in that stillness, you return to yourself, not the reactive version, but the whole one. He version, who knows? Silence isn't the absence of words, it's the presence of self. The beauty of alignment is that it never needs to be forced. When energy matches naturally, you feel it without having to ask for reassurance. You stop wondering where you stand because consistency makes everything clear. You begin to understand that true connection is not made through effort alone. It's made through mutual presence. You don't need to chase what already sees your worth. You don't need to remind someone of how valuable you are when they already show up like they know. When your energy is matched, you feel safe, not anxious. You feel calm, not confused. That feeling isn't loud, but it's unmistakable. And once you've experienced it, you won't settle for anything less. There's a moment when you realize that one-sided effort is not love, it's labor. It's the kind of labor that leaves you emotionally exhausted, always trying to fill the gaps someone else left open. But you don't exist to complete what others won't contribute to. Your presence is not a placeholder while someone figures out how to value it. When you stop over-functioning, you create space to notice what's actually there, not what you hope would show up. And often, the clarity is sobering. You're not hard to love. You were just loving in places where the energy wasn't being returned. That's not your flaw, it's your awakening. Choosing peace over performance is a bold kind of self-love. You stop playing the role of the fixer, the chaser, the convincer. You let go of trying to earn what should be given freely. That shift is subtle but powerful. You no longer measure connection by how hard you work to keep it. You measure it by how naturally it flows when two people both show up. You understand that relationships aren't built on your effort alone. They're built when effort is mirrored. So you stop overextending. You stop explaining your needs over and over again. You stop showing up for people who only meet you halfway when it's convenient. When your energy isn't matched, you begin to feel it in your body first. You feel tired after every interaction, drained by every exchange. That's your nervous system trying to tell you something isn't right. And eventually your heart catches up with what your body already knows. You learn that inconsistency is not exciting, it's a warning. The ones who bring peace into your life won't make you question your worth. They won't create emotional highs and lows that leave you confused. So you start listening, you start honoring that quiet pull toward calmness. And in doing so, you break the cycle of mistaking intensity for intimacy. You realize that you are not here to carry the emotional weight of others. You're here to experience mutual joy, growth, and connection. Relationships should not feel like emotional projects where one person constantly repairs what the other breaks. Your love is not a rehabilitation center for unavailable hearts. When you begin to match energy, you give what you receive. No more, no less. You release the need to prove yourself, fix people, or heal what's not yours to carry. That isn't bitterness, it's balance. It's choosing emotional equality over emotional exhaustion. It's stepping away from patterns that glorify suffering in the name of love. You don't have to make excuses for lack of effort anymore. You don't have to read between the lines, rationalize silence, or tolerate breadcrumbs. You stop waiting for someone to change when they've shown you who they are. Matching energy means you respond instead of chase. You mirror what's being offered, not because you're playing games, but because you're finally playing fair. It's about equity, Emotional reciprocity, showing up where you're seen, not where you're ignored. And the more you practice this, the easier it becomes. The silence you once feared becomes the peace you protect. And from that place, you grow. You matching energy is not about withholding affection, it's about preserving your dignity. It's about understanding that your love is valuable and shouldn't be poured endlessly into places that don't pour back. You learn to give from overflow, not from depletion. You stop trying to revive dead conversations. You stop reopening closed doors. You no longer internalize someone else's inconsistency as your inadequacy. You realize that what doesn't flow naturally isn't meant to be forced. That someone's inability to meet you emotionally isn't your cue to try harder. It's your cue to step back. And stepping back isn't failure, it's freedom. You begin to understand that silence is also an answer. A delayed message is still a message. A lack of effort is still an effort. It's just going in a different direction. So you start listening with more than your ears. You start paying attention to how you feel after every interaction. Do you feel lighter, grounded, understood? If the answer is no, then that's your sign. Energy doesn't lie. You don't need a dramatic ending to let something go. You just need enough clarity to stop pouring your energy into confusion. And that clarity comes when you stop chasing patterns that never give back. Eventually, you become fluent in emotional consistency. You stop being impressed by charm and start being drawn to reliability. You begin to crave the steady, not the sensational. You know now that peace is more attractive than potential, so you surround yourself with people who show up fully, people who remember the little things, who check in without being asked, who match your effort without needing reminders. That kind of alignment feels different, it feels safe, it feels sustainable. And once you know how that feels, you can't go back to guessing where you stand. You've upgraded your emotional standard. This shift isn't just about who you allow in your life, it's about who you've become. Someone who doesn't force energy, beg for consistency, or chase emotional highs that leave you empty. Someone who honors her capacity, who protects her softness by applying wisdom, who matches energy not to punish but to preserve. Because when effort is mutual, everything flows. Communication is effortless, presence is felt, trust is built slowly but surely, and you don't have to keep proving yourself because the right spaces don't ask you to, they already know. So you no longer chase alignment, you become it, and everything else either rises to meet you or quietly falls away.